Hello everyone, and welcome to the first Permit live coding hour. We are super excited to be here today. That's actually the first time that we try that. We do a lot of live stream. If you're here, you've probably been in one of our live stream. Most of the live stream is in a general topics, but then we say, hey, we did a very cool things in Permit for the last month, so why won't we just show it to everyone? I'll say first the same announcement as every time we are doing it. If you have any kind of questions, comments, wherever you're watching us, either at YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, just write your question or thoughts in the comments and we'll see them here on the screen and we can answer you. Super cool. And with that, I'll start with introduction. Today with me, I'm Gabriel, but you probably know that. With me today, Filip and Thomas. Filip, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, it's awesome to be here. I'm excited to show you some cool live coding with some of the cool permit features that we have that you hopefully will find useful. I'm sure especially if you're developing authorization. Now a little bit about myself. Well, I'm the developer advocate at permit.io, but you also might know me, know my name, or even more so recognize my face from YouTube, because on YouTube I have a YouTube channel called Developer Filip, where you might see me often posting videos about coding, web dev, and other things like that. So that's a little bit about me. Maybe let's move on to Thomas.
Yeah, sure. Thomas Kirk, solutions architect at Permit. I've had 10 years of my career in IAM, and really excited how Permit kind of solves the authorization piece, especially from a developer-centered standpoint, and hopefully can show you some features that will save you time in development, especially around user provisioning and the SCIM protocol. So really excited to see how that goes today.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us, Thomas. For people who see Thomas is not in his usual background, Thomas is joining us from his yearly vacation. So really thank you for that, Thomas. Permit is a very fair employee. We usually do not get employees when they are in vacation, but Thomas was so excited about user provisioning. So he said, hey, I can join from the beach. So thank you, Thomas, again for that. And I am Gabriel. I'm leading the developer relations Permit. I have a lot of years in experience in IAM as a developer. And today we are going to talk a lot about new features and things like that. And again, let's use this hour also as office hour. So anything you have to say to Permit, ask about the roadmap, etc., you're welcome to do that. A little short on the agenda that we have today. So we have a lot of features that we actually delivered for the last month in Permit. But today we want to focus on two key areas. The first one that we'll demo also is about user provisioning and user groups. As you might know, Permit is very focused on customer identity and the way that developers writing authorization, but they need also features that related more to the identity access management field. And we added features in the field of provisioning users from your identity provider using SCIM, and also how to model users in groups, which is very important. For many users, you want to put a group of users and then you want to assign them in a role to this group, and then you want to maybe put some resources in the group to have some policies. We added support to that. And then we'll go to the access request element. Maybe you've been part of our launch last month, so you probably know the basics about it. But today we'll have a live demo that will show you how you can very easily, in a really short time, implement elements that will allow your application create secure collaboration in literally single lines of code. Then we'll get to a topic that I am really excited about. I know it could be kind of complex for many developers who are not into the fine-grained authorization world, but I think it's a super interesting engineering topic, which is correctness versus verification. If you're familiar with Zanzibar, the Google Zanzibar, the relationship-based access control, the main strength is correctness. Every time you do a policy decision, you know that this data and the state is correct. And that's because Google Zanzibar is stateful. It has a state. But correctness is a problem of performance. And this is why things like engines like Cedar and Open Policy Agent are excel in verification. You can verify every decision, how long it takes in any matter of time. And we build a system that gets you the benefits of both. We have a new feature of permit that allows you both correctness and verification. We'll get to that. And if we'll have time, we'll also show a very cool features that show you how can you integrate your automated CI/CD with permit. So you can create automation with GitHub Action that allow you to open test environment in permit and run all your policy configuration in test environment before you are merging it to production. With the hope that time will give us the time for everything we want to show today, we'll start with SCIM. Thomas, do you want to take the lead, or you prefer me to?
Sure, I don't mind.
Yeah, that would be super cool.
And also, guys, remember to ask a lot of questions. This is your time to really, and not just get to know Permit and the features and the roadmap, like Gabriel said, but also get to know other things about Permit itself as a company. So make sure those questions are coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So to show that these things are working, let's actually start another project. We'll use one that we currently have, temp project. I've created a SCIM tester, but I'm going to, for the sake of showing that this works with, and to walk everybody through a fresh example, I'm going to create another environment. And
5.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. Yeah, so Thomas is creating now environment in permit, and we'll test. Maybe I'll give some short word about SCIM, because we say this keyword a lot. So SCIM is a name of a protocol for System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. This is actually a protocol created for mainly provisioning users between identity-related products. So if you have already, and you probably have, identity provider where you authenticate your user and managing your identities, now you don't need to use special API calls for sync user. Most of the identity provider actually support SCIM. So you can just connect them with SCIM to permit. And Thomas is going to show us how do we automatically provisioning users from Okta, maybe the most known identity provider today, to permit.
And for those of you who don't know SCIM, you can think of it as an API, a very specific API for user provisioning. It defines the way your API, the get and post and put verbs for HTTP on how to create, to do all the CRUD functions for users and groups. And so it kind of gives you that public-facing interface that is the API, and then on the back end, you get to determine how those things interact with your application. So Slack is a pretty big proponent of SCIM. If you go to Slack's API and you see the user provisioning features, it's all SCIM based. And so there's been a lot of adoption with SaaS products and around the new offerings out there that, hey, if you're going to do anything user-based, user provisioning-based, you need to support SCIM. So that's what SCIM is. Gabriel is right. Most often, like one of the biggest identity providers out there for some of these cloud provisionings and kind of helped pioneer the acceptance of SCIM was Okta. So I'm gonna switch over to Okta, and I'm actually going to create a new application as well. So when you're coming in here, you'll want to browse the app catalog from Okta, and Okta has a template application called SCIM. And so for the SCIM application, you're going to want to use SCIM 2.0. They actually have a 1.1. The 2.0 compliant is now the one that Permit supports. And you're going to do header auth. Click on add integration. And we're just going to rename this so it's easier to find live. We're going to skip the sign-in things for now. This is basically if your application does have the ability to do sign-in, you can support that via SAML as well via this application. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to only look at this provisioning. And so next really gets into how to configure the integration. And so I'm going to look at pull open. We actually have a Okta integration guide that is really easy to follow. So the first thing I did was create this test application, which is great. Sign-in application, which I skipped, which we don't need. And then finally, there is this URL, and this is the special URL that will be specific to your project and to your environment within Permit. So you'll grab this, and we'll go to provisioning, configure this, enable this. We'll put in the base URL.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see here that there is
the project ID and environment.
There it is, 2 fields that we have to fill in. One's the project ID, the other one's environment ID. So I'm going to go back here and we'll look at projects and go to temp proj for SCIM. There's SCIM test live. We'll grab that.
This is a very handy example of how you can get your project and environment IDs in Permit. So make sure you take notes, guys.
Yeah, I just thought about it today. But yeah, Permit is, as you probably know, a hierarchy required project and environment ID, and we now support getting them from the UI directly.
So temp proj, oh, I put the wrong value.
Yeah,
Let's see.
temp proj and then...
And then SCIM test live.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and the API token is still right here. It's the one that goes to the environment. You copy the environment key and we'll use that. You should be able to test the credentials and get back a yes. So that's great. This is step 1. The next step here, even though this turns on provisioning, there's a final step to kind of get this to work with Okta, and that's by doing create users, enabling the create users, the update, the deactivate. Sync password doesn't actually do anything, and the password that Okta ends up sending via SCIM is not the Okta password, but they do support a sync password for a change event in the future. That's not something that Permit is dealing with. Really, we just care about user synchronization and group synchronization. And so once we click save here, what we should see is now we have the ability, now this is kind of hooked up between the two. Permit gave us the URL, the environment ID, the project ID, the API. Once we put that into Okta and it did its validation and we enabled those features, now we can synchronize users and groups. And so kind of this is where the magic happens. And typically when you're doing provisioning, you'll use a group based. And so I'm just going to, for the sake of this, I'm going to use a teacher group. I can change the mappings of the attributes. For the time being, we're going to use the default ones. Now when this gets assigned, what this is going to do, now that it's assigned, Okta has a queue and all these users get put that are in the teacher group. We can open up a link to say users will be pushed down into Permit. So if we come here into SCIM test live and we looked at the directory, now we see teacher at Melanator and S Jackson, Samuel Jackson at Melanator. And so anything that you change now for teacher, if we come in here to teacher, profile is teacher, let's just say teacher permit IO and come down and save this. So now this, when we come back here and see and refresh, we'll see that, well, we should see the name change. Those updates are propagated through. Let's actually change, first name may not, let's change the, I may not have mapped the first name. Let's do something that I know is mapped, which is the login. Oh, the beauty of a live example. So all these updates will flow down through, but let's go on to group synchronization, which is the next level of provisioning. So this assignment group does user-based provisioning. And so the users get pushed down to the SCIM that way via this assignments, and you can do groups or people, but you can also do push groups. And so there's an additional role to come in here to say, I want my role or group that is assigned to the user to come down. So I'll find that teachers group. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a role inside of Permit. We're going to look at the hierarchy there of how this works. And it's going to assign the users that are in that teacher group the teacher role. So if we come back here into directory and we look at the policy, we'll see the teacher role.
So assigning it as a top level role, right? Not as a relationship based role.
This is like a RBAC policy where the group becomes a role inside of Permit. So when you do an assignment inside the directory, now the teacher and Samuel will have access role. And so this is a kind of a global RBAC role that gets assigned. So now inside my policy, when I am creating a resource.
I'll say that if you feel not familiar with the way that roles is looking in a Thomas screen, because you haven't been in Permit dashboard for the last 2 weeks, we did another step in our way to simplify role-based access control and relationship-based access control. And instead of calling that in these nerdy names that do not say nothing for you, like resource role and stuff like that, we change it to top level role and instance level role, which is much more fit with the way that you actually build application. You have the top level and then you have the instance level. That's the way object works in software. So if you'll go now to your dashboard, you'll see the roles the same as Thomas do. We have a strict policy of no private screens in permit. So it's just another step to simplify the way we are doing RBAC and RBAC.
That's great. So now you see that the different actions that are associated with API that I've created are assigned to the teacher role, and I click save. So now all the users in the directory that have that role are able to do CRUD features, and now you can manage this like any other role that you've created but from permit in the past. And any of these roles that you assign to the application inside of, so there's a two-step process. The assignment here again is the assignment of, and let's do students. The assignment is I want to synchronize the user to the directory, and the group is I want to group it. So push group, do students. And so if there is a user who has multiple roles, just like Samuel does, we'll actually see that he gets both of those roles. So he is a teacher and he's a student. And so those roles will come down. Now, if I come in and I remove these unlink and delete, they'll come and go up for Samuel anymore. He won't have access from a student because it's been, so this is kind of a overview, or sorry, the teacher one. So nobody now has that teacher role because it's been removed from the SCIM integration from the Okta side. And this kind of gets you the ability to handle the automation on the Okta side and have permit update the roles and attributes of the user from Okta.
I think personally that is very helpful. As you might know, in permit we have a high separation between the schema, like the configuration that we have, and the data. And this is why probably our like Terraform provider, etc., do not support users, which are the data, and you need to use the APIs like sync user, etc. And the way that we have now automated provisioning could really help you to synchronize better to users' data to permit. That actually people asking a lot, how do I sync users? How do I sync roles? And I think there are more perspectives to look at that. So, for example, one of the problems with traditional role-based access control system is role explosion, that you just create another role and another role and another role. But here with permit, the way that you build policy with the multi-tenancy, you can really reduce the role and use policy instead of using more and more roles to enforce role-based permission. So I think the SCIM integration could really be helpful for many developer. If you have any comments or any thoughts on the way that we abstracted, the way that we are actually doing groups into roles, into top-level roles in permit to the default tenant, we'll be super happy to hear from that. So you can just comment every way you watch, and we try to answer or discuss live your thoughts.
And congratulations to Thomas. Even though he's on holiday, he managed to pull off a successful demo. So let's get the round of applause going. There we go. There we go.
Yeah. Oh, that is super cool one. I'll say that we have also another cool feature about groups, not only groups that translated to roles. We have a whole new groups API feature. If you want to read more about it, I can share with you the link to the new docs, but I don't think we'll have time to go for it today. If that will be successful, I'm sure we'll have much more live coding, and then next time could be a great opportunity to talk about the new groups API. So we can now continue with the... So again, I would like to personally thanks Thomas myself too for joining us from the vacation and showing us the provisioning. Thomas, I think you are the most exciting engineering permit about the particular user provisioning scheme feature. So Thanks for making it done, and thanks for making the demo for us.
It was my pleasure.
And with that say, I want to continue to Filip that is going to share with us how easy it is to create access request elements. But before we start coding, let's discuss a bit about access request element. The next step after you are implementing a successful permission or authorization into your application is allowing your users to create secure collaboration between the users. What does that mean? So if you know, traditionally, there are two main distinction in access control: discretionary access control and mandatory-based access control. In mandatory-based access control, there is only one administrator or developer that control all the permissions. And in discretionary-based access control, the users are allowed to create roles from themselves. But in a way of cloud application that we don't know who will be the new user that will create account with us and who are the user that they will want to give permissions, we want to create more proactive way for access control. We want to give our user, to delegate our user a way to create secure collaboration between them on their data, on their roles. And many users who came to permit say, hey, you have cool APIs, you have a very cool way to configure the permissions, but we actually need to develop maybe the same screen over and over to create secure collaboration. And this is why we came with permit elements. Permit elements is a set of components, if you are not familiar with them yet, a set of components for people who want to implement UI screens, user interface screens for secure collaboration between users. Today, or for the last couple of months, we have already user management screen that allows you to manage the users that has access to some resources in the system as the end users of the app. And we also have the audit log. But the most exciting thing is access request component. So how we call him in permit sheriff. Filip, your stage is yours.
That's the one. That's the one. Yes. So it's very exciting because not only today you'll see the access request in action, but you'll also see the user management in action, which actually allows us to control the requests, how people get access to things. Now, very importantly, I want to highlight that I love demos. First of all, because I'm a developer advocate. Second of all, because before this live stream, I deleted everything. And we're going to rebuild it from scratch inside of Permit. And you'll see, hopefully, how easy it is without me failing, I hope. So let me share my screen and let me kind of guide you through the whole thing of what we'll be building. And then let's actually go ahead and build it. So what you should be seeing in front of you is just a screenshot for the moment. And this is a screenshot of a very basic app that we're going to be working with today. Now, we're not going to be building the whole app from scratch, because otherwise I think we'd be on this live stream until the end of the evening or day for wherever or whatever time zone you guys are in. But what we're going to do is just focus on the important parts of the important parts of actually working with permit elements and making sure that we understand all the little individual bits of what there has to be done in order to be successful when actually working with them. Now, I think the best place to start here is to essentially just give you a quick explanation of how this app is going to work and what we envision for it. And then we'll jump into the permit policy editor and into the permit app and actually not only just configure the whole policy, but also configure all the elements we're working with. Now, this app in general is based on 3 different users. One user that doesn't have any access to view any of the user details, which you can see on the screen, because technically we will have a button that will say, well, let's request access to some user details. We'll have another user who is going to be able to view the user details, but not be able to manage the permissions of who gets access to what. And then we'll have the third user, which we'll call the admin probably. And that person not only will have access to the user details, but also have access to the user management element to be able to manage users and approve all the requests that will be incoming. Now, I think the best way to kind of start with this is to actually move into talking and looking at permit and talk about what we currently have set up and what we are missing. Now, currently what we have set up is a very basic application that allows me to log in. Now, with that application uses an authentication solution called Stitch It's one of the multiple and many authentication solutions on the market today. Realistically, you can do this with any authentication solution as long as it provides you with a JSON Web Token, and therefore inside that JSON Web Token, a unique identity for that specific user. Well, it should be fine. And in this case, I have already created 3 different users via Stitch, and I've synced them and added them into permit. And those 3 users here, as you can see, are defined by their unique identity that Stitch or any authentication solution will provide you with. And then some user details so we can much easier differentiate them in this demo. We have a main user, which is just the very basic user called Filip Smith. And that's a user that has the email philip@permit.io. Then we have a family Smith user, which is differentiated by Filip plus family@permit.io. And then we have an admin Smith user, which is a Filip plus admin@permit.io. So you can see that we have here already incorporated some differentiation here so we can understand how these roles occur and who we are logging in with, and therefore what kind of permissions they might get. Now, what we don't have is we go into the policy, is any part of the policy. And I thought that to make it even more interesting, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete everything live, because why not? This is here to show you how simple actually recreating policies and actually making policies with permit are. So here we have no policy screen and everything is gone. And we need to actually start to create that policy from scratch in order to be able to then utilize the elements that we want to be able to obviously have that access request ongoing. Now, first of all, well, let's start off with creating a role. So we can manage our roles here. It takes us to the role screen, and we can create a role. Now, first of all, we're going to create the basic role, and I'm going to just call it a friend. Now, a friend role will be someone that can just request access to view your user details, but they won't be able to do anything else. So I'm just going to save this, and what you'll notice is that we have a role already created. So now let's create 2 more roles. The next role is going to be called a family friend, if I can spell that correctly. And now family friend will have slightly elevated permissions. So family friend should not only be able to access the app, but also should be able to view some details of a user, maybe your friend, maybe someone else. And we can save that. And then finally, we'll create the 3rd role.
That's not always true.
Yes.
Not if you read Anna Karenina.
And it seems like I haven't saved the family friend. So let me just redo that quickly. Family friend right here. And let's save it. There we go. And then let's add another role. And this one is going to be the basic role, which we'll just call the admin. So we have 3 roles. And now we need to figure out how these roles are actually going to interact within the system. And specifically, roles interact with the resources that we define. So things that we can interact with in the application, or in other words, things that we want to guard specific users from doing inside of our application. So in this case, if we, for example, had a resource called a document, well, maybe we don't want some users to access this or read this document, right? In this case, for our resource, we'll add the resource, and I've already had it here because I was deleting the policy live, but I didn't delete the resource. Let me just delete it and recreate it so you see how easy it is. I can create the resource. As you saw, it's going to be called user details. Right here, and we're going to have some actions on this. Now, actions can be anything that you want it to be. They're very bespoke and very specific. And in this case, we want to have 2 guards in the system. One of the guards is that, hey, can a user view the user details? So that will be our first action. And the second action will be, well, can a user maybe manage access to those user details, or to who can view the user details, right? So we can create a manage access action. And I think that's everything that we need for this resource. So we can just go ahead and save it. And as you'll notice, we have this resource now saved. So as you can see, because I'm creating this policy for the first time, we're getting a prompt saying, okay, so you have a resource now, you have roles, so you can actually start creating a policy within permit. So we can go to the policy editor, which is just this tab up here. And here we have our policy. So we have the 3 different roles that we've defined. We have the specific resource that we're restricting access to, and the actions that the specific role might perform on that resource. However, they still cannot, because we haven't checked which role can do what. So in this case, we can actually go through and start actually adhering to the policy and making sure that whatever this policy defines is what that role can actually do. So in this case, let's start with friend. A friend, well, can he view the user details? Well, no, because we want the friend to actually be the one that requests access to view the user details. And can the friend manage access? Well, definitely not. We definitely don't want to do that. Here, when we have a family friend role, well, can the family friend role view the user details? Sure, he should be able, or she should be able to view the user details, whoever is logged in. And then for admin, well, we want to also view and manage the access. And the manage access is going to be the restriction that will allow us to essentially visualize the user management element and be able to manage those users, like the friend, who is requesting access and therefore approve or deny them, whether they can or cannot do something like this. And we can save those changes. Now, how long did that take me? Maybe 5 minutes, maybe not even. And we have our policy in place, and that's saved. Now, when we save that policy, that generates the complex code that no engineer wants to write, and it informs the policy engine that I actually have running in the background of those changes. So naturally, now if I go into the app, suddenly the policy engine will understand these enforcement points I have in my code and be able to obviously evaluate them and get back the results that we want. Now, the next step is actually to start configuring our elements, because in order to configure elements, we actually need some roles, because we need to specify what kind of access rights those roles are going to get inside of our application. So let's navigate to the Elements tab inside of Permit. Now here we have access to creating all the different elements. Like Gabriel mentioned earlier, we have user management, we have audit logs, and we have a family of approval flow elements, such as access request, operation approvals, and approval management. And today we're going to be working with the access request. And in order to manage the access request, we're also going to be working with the user management. And the user management is the
two elements
element.
at once.
Sorry?
2 elements at once.
2 elements at once, and it's very simple.
Or actually 3, right? No, 2.
2.
2, yeah.
Great. And in this case, let's create a user management element. And I'm just going to call this the user management. I'll just call it the user management element for the sake of this demo, because it's the only element that we're going to have, which is the user management. Now, we're configuring this element based on basic RBAC roles, because that's what we're dealing with here. Either the user can perform an action, but depending on a specific resource, or they can't. And here is where we get to the very cool nitty-gritty role permission levels, or in this case, meta permissions. Now, as you can see, all the roles that we have defined, they appear in this box called the hidden roles. Now, the flexibility we have in this case is to be able to take the roles that we have created within Permit and drag them to a specific level for this specific element. So in this case, we have all these like 4 levels here. Level 1 is the workspace owner, and you can see that this is what they can do within this particular element in this specific environment that we're working with. Then we have level 2, level 3, and so on and so forth. And in this case, I need to administer these roles into the right places. So I know that, for example, if a user with that specific role has access to this element, they'll be able to do X amount of these actions, right? And in this case, obviously, when we have the admin, we want him to do absolutely everything. So in this case, what you see on the right-hand side is essentially a visualization of what that element is going to look like when we actually work with it. Now you can see this is loading here because we actually need to drag other roles into the system. So in this case, for the sake of this demo, we're going to have family friend be the manager, and we'll have friend be the viewer. But realistically, in this case, these 2 roles will never have access to this element. So technically, where they sit, they could just stay in hidden roles. It would also work perfectly fine. But if I maybe change to a different level, what you can see actually happens is that as I change from, for example, level 1 workspace owner, where I have the ability to add specific users and assign them the role, if I'm, for example, a friend who's only a viewer on this element, supposedly if he has access to this element in the first place and it's not guarded by a permit check, then he can only maybe view the users and nothing else. Not sure why it's not loading the users. We'll figure that out in a minute. Yes. Exactly.
Whoa!
Thank you, moderator.
Yeah.
As part of this element, you also get other options. You can, style it the way you want. You can specifically maybe show the user details that you want. Set up some notifications. Maybe you want a webhook triggered whenever something happens in that element. So you really have the flexibility to really make this your own. But in this case, the admin role is the important one that we have, and I'm going to create this element. Now, as this element is created, let's actually go down and focus on the access request element, which is the main one that we're essentially demonstrating the functionality of in this demo. Now, if I create this element, I'll call it access request. And here, the reason we did the user management firsthand is because we need to connect it to a user management element. Now, here I called it user management element. I'm sure your naming will be much better. But here I'm connecting it to a user management element. Again, I can style it. I can do and customize it the way I want. And this is what the element
looks like. Let's put a red button.
Let's put a red button. Great choice. Let's just drag it to the red thing. There we go. Look at that. Now it looks more scary.
Like think twice before you request access.
Think twice. And really, we can change the message text. We can say, well, actually, think twice before you hit this button. So the customization, the customization options here are
break in case of emergency.
Exactly. So your customization here is endless, really, and you can make this however you want. Again, you have you can support access justification, and that's what we're going to do here. So if someone is restricted and they get this approval element, they can provide a reason why they want to join to explain themselves further. And here the moderator or the admin will come, and maybe if the reason is not good enough, they'll just reject you straight away. Who knows? And that's essentially the configuration of that element. So we can create this access request element, and here we have it. However, now we have to go back to our user management element. And now what we'll have as part of this is also the approval component in user management. This is a section that allows us to link the access request element, which I called access request. Again, I'm sure your naming will be much better, to this element. And as soon as we connect the user management to the access request that we've created, this is just a demonstration, but essentially if someone requests access, so we can assume here that username and username2 requested access to a resource, whatever that might be. If the admin logs in and he has access to the user management element, he'll be able to see this, the pending users of who's requesting this access, and be able to either approve or deny them. And also, if they do approve, they can pick a specific role that they want to approve them as. And in this case, obviously, we'll show you how that works a little later. So now we can save this element. And really, this is it. Now we've created our elements. We've created our whole policy. So really what's left is to actually jump into the code and show you how these elements are actually embedded inside of the coding logic. And as part of the coding logic, we'll go back to a very specific section in permit called JOKs, or JSON Web Key Sets, but I'll explain that in just a second. Let's jump into the code and see how all of this actually comes to life and hopefully works. So I have a very basic application. Now, we're not going to go through every single file that we have here, but we're going to go through the 4 main ones.
That's a lot of files. That's vanilla JavaScript?
No, this is React with TypeScript, not vanilla JavaScript.
Oh,
God,
wow.
No. Please, no. Yes, so we've got basically 4 main components that you guys need to be aware of here. Now, as part of implementing any kind of permissions within permit, the main thing that you will be using is the permit.check function. Now, this is essentially like an enforcement, or what I like to call a guard inside of your code, that once a user logs in, he confirms their identity, he proves and claims and proves to you that he is who he really is. Therefore, that authentication solution issues them a session, issues them a JSON Web Token. And as part of that JSON Web Token, they have obviously their unique identity. That unique identity links back into permit to know, hey, this user has this role, and therefore he can perform these actions on the specific resources. And that permit check function handles all of that. So realistically, you just run your policy engine, configure your policy, and just create 1 line of code inside your app. And therefore, you know whether that user can or cannot do something. Now, in this case, inside of the profile, well, the profile is just the main page that we log into to actually see the button and manage the users. And we'll see and get to the app actually running in just a second. But it also has some logic to check the permissions if we can view specific user details. And this is just a very basic kind of function that essentially specifies the action that we're looking for, specifies the resource that we're performing that action on, fetches the user identity from the Stitch user kind of hook in this case, where a lot of these authentication solutions, they provide you already with these pre-built React ways of kind of fetching all the user information, fetching all the session information, fetching all the JSON Web Token information. All of these are mostly inbuilt in pretty much all authentication solutions. So this is really not a problem. And in this case, we're getting that user object. And from that user object, we're just getting that unique identity, which we have inside of permit, which was, if we go back to permit, go back into the directory, which is this. This is what I'm talking about. Now, going back to the code, so I have this one function called whether a user can check for the permissions. And we send this response to the, we send this essentially API call to the backend, passing in that ID, action, and resource. And we'll talk about the backend check function in just a second. And then we have another function which just basically does the same thing, checks for managing permissions, but it checks if a user can manage access to the user details and sends that kind of response again to that backend function, that backend enforcement point that checks against the policy engine. Here we create a use effect function. This is just that these two essentially permission checks run on as soon as the page renders. So obviously we can adjust the UI depending on what the user and what kind of permissions he has, and specifically here conditionally renders some components. And then we have our return statement, which just renders the whole JSX and essentially all of the web page, the buttons, the modules that are coming up, and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the check function, the API call to the check function, it actually happens in our backend. It's an API call to this check function, and we have this root here. And this uses permit. It uses permit. It creates a permit instance, a permit object, basically. And then it has a function called check permissions, which takes, again, the user, the action, and the resource. This is just an abstracted function of what the permit check really looks like, which is exactly this. This is really the whole complexity of the whole thing, which is not complex at all. And this permit check function knows to call and grab all the details from the policy engine regarding the parameters that have been passed in. And then it's just a simple GET request to be able to return all that data back to us to the front end. The last thing that really you should know here is we created basically two modules that have two components inside them. The access request element component and the user management element component. Now, if I switch between the two, you won't see much difference. It's pretty much the same component. The only thing that really changes is the login method, or really the login method stays the same, really. But realistically, what changes is what we return. And we don't have a return here yet. But what we return is the iframe that permit just provides us of that whole element. You just return the iframe, you just copy the code, you just paste it into return, and it works. As part of the elements working, there is two little steps that you have to do beforehand. Now, in order for elements to work, you actually have to log into an element. Now, as Gabriel was saying previously, we have this whole hierarchy within permit. You have your whole main organization. Then you have your specific projects. Each project is essentially like a separate application that you might be building. And inside of that application, you have different environments. And actually, let me show you. It's going to be a little bit easier to maybe visualize. So, for example, I have this project per se, which are called YouTube videos, because I do a lot of those. And in this case, I've created an environment, or I have 7 environments here, but this is the environment we're currently in, which I called the access request tutorial. And this environment essentially stores that whole policy that we've created, all the users with those unique IDs, and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the code, essentially as part of logging into an element, because elements are environment specific, we have to specify not only the tenant, which is the specific tenant that we're currently working with. Now, I haven't created any more tenants, and I'm not going to jump into explain how important tenants are, because it's just another building block of permit. In this case, we're just
multi-tenancy need its own live stream.
Basically, yes. And I don't want to overcomplicate it anymore. So for the tenant, essentially, as you create an organization within permit, you by default get issued a tenant called default, and this is what we're referring to here. And then we're referring to the environment ID. You can pass in the actual ID of the environment. You can also pass in the environment name as Thomas was doing earlier. Both will work fine. The other thing required here is the user JSON Web Token. And obviously the JSON Web Token you can just get from your authentication solution. Like I said, there is multiple methods of being able to do so. Now, the important thing here is that when you log into a permit element, you get many ways to do so. We provide you with the flexibility of having more than one way to do so. And I actually have a little handy documentation diagram here that explains it real well. And I know Gabriel likes diagrams. He probably also created this one.
Yeah.
Exactly. And here, as part of this, you have a bunch of different
Actually,
kind of login methods. Yeah, you can log in for a header, you can log in for a cookie, or you can log in for a bearer token. Now, this is kind of up to you what best fits your app and how you want to do it and maybe what you're comfortable with. But the other cool method of what you can actually do is log in through the front end, directly via the front end only method, which is my favorite. And it happens to also be, in my opinion, the simplest to do. Now, if you choose to go the front end only method, which we have because we've specified that the login method will be front end only, you need to configure your JSON web key sets. Now, I don't mean to scare anyone. It's not very complex at all. But a very quick explanation is that JSON web key sets are essentially there to validate the current JSON web token that you have, in simple terms. And a permit gives you the functionality in your no-code UI. Sorry?
It sounds promising.
Yes. And essentially, permit gives you the functionality to do that within the no-code UI in a very, very simple way. Now, depending on the authentication solution that you might be using, it might differ slightly. But if we go into the settings, there is a whole tab called the JSON Web Key Sets config. And here you'll notice that this is the current project that I'm in, the YouTube videos, and the current environment that I'm in. And I have a JSON Web Key Set that's already configured here. Now, if we actually look at this, it looks a little crazy because you get a whole object that means nothing basically to the normal kind of developer. But realistically, this is almost like a certificate to validate the current JSON Web Token that you're working with from the current authentication solution that you might be using. Now, I actually pulled up a reference here because we're using Stitch, and most authentication solutions will have this, where they provide you with a way to fetch your JSON web key set. And in this case, here we can run a curl command in our terminal and just generate this response and copy and paste it into permit. What they also provide you is sometimes they give you a whole URL, like something like this. And permit gives you the option to just pass in that URL to get those JSON web key sets. And you can specify how often you want permit to refetch it in case anything changes. In this case, I've just pasted it in. The output I got from my terminal, I pasted it in, and it's essentially good to go. And then once you have done this,
that I don't really know what is jokes, but that looks like a very cool utilization of this joke.
It does, and I think this might also be an exciting thing to talk about in another.
I'm just enjoying the joke about jokes.
The joke about jokes, yeah, because
I can continue that for the whole night.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of people I pronounce it, or I just kind of read the full thing. But yeah, a lot of people call it jokes. So yeah, maybe we should have
what I love with this synonym that's specifically called joke or joke, but when people are reading things letter by letter, then they pronounce it differently depending on the alphabetic they do. So I mostly like the permit EO version more than the permit IO. I'll just put it here.
EO.
Yeah, permit EO is the best.
It is the best.
Yeah.
Right. So anyone configuring or working with jokes or JWKSs or however you want to call it, don't be afraid of it. Most authentication solutions just give you a plug and play method to just get whatever you need, and you can just plug and play it into permit and it will work. Now, as part of the front end only method, this is really everything that you have to do. You essentially define this, in this case, if you're making a whole element or a whole component out of it, you just define it as part of the use effect. So the user logs in as soon as this element kind of comes to life. And really, that is it. So now what's left is just actually getting the generated iframe from permit and pasting it into here. And it should just kind of work out of the box. So fingers crossed, let's do that. And I hope it works. So first of all, let's work with the access requests. I can get the code, and this is what you have. It essentially generates an iframe for you. I'm just going to copy it, or I can just copy the code here.
And
even
soon
simpler.
to be added React and Angular component.
Exactly, which is very exciting because it's going to make it even nicer. But here I'm going to just replace this fragment, shortcut fragment element with an iframe. Now I've provided myself this little code snippet here because I want it to look a certain nice way. This is just styling. So don't worry about this. I just want it to look nicer when I present. So I'm just going to replace the width, the height, and the style with something a little different. All right, and now for the user management element, guess what? We do the exact same thing. We go to the user management element, click this button, click the button to copy the code, click the button of your VS Code editor, and just click Command V to paste it, and here you go. That's how simple it is. Let's just use this again, because I'm crazy about UI. There we go. All right, so technically, now thinking about it, that should just work. Oh, actually, no, I take that back, because one very important thing that we haven't done is in our directory, you'll notice that we have the users, but we haven't assigned them the roles.
Oh, yeah.
So each specific user needs to have a specific role to essentially enable them the type of access that they may have. So for, in this case, the basic user, Filip at permit.io, or in this case, Filip Smith, I'm going to assign him the role. Well, first of all, I'm going to pick the tenant, and I'm just going to pick the default tenant because that's the only one that's available. And his top level access role will be just a friend. So the role with the least permissions, can't view anything, has to request access to something, or in this case, to this resource. All right, so that's one of them. And as you can see, as soon as I assign the role, the other two disappeared. That's because it automatically changed tenant. So if there is no roles within permit, users will appear under all tenants. If a user now has a role, they will appear under the specific tenant, in this case, the default tenant that is available. So now let's go back and let's add the other roles. So admin Smith, so the person who's going to be the administrator, also in the default tenant, will have the admin role. Let's save that. And then back to all tenants again, family Smith, so the person who will have the family role, so slightly elevated permissions to view the user details, also part of the default tenant, and now a family friend. Lovely. Now, I'm just thinking, I think in my code, I've actually called this role or the ID of this role something different. So let's actually go back and just check if this all matches up, because I want this to work first time round. So let's just have a look. So we've got the family friend role. And actually, no, this is not necessary because we are going by the unique ID. So really, I don't have to change anything in this case. So the role name can change and it shouldn't have an impact on your code. And maybe I did that on purpose, who knows, just to show you the simplicity of this. All right, so now that we have assigned the roles, we've got the elements, we've got our policy in place. Let's run the app and see what happens. All right, so here we logged into the app. We're running on localhost 3000. Every engineer and developer should be familiar with that. And let's log in as the first user. The first user is just Filip at permit.io. Let's continue with the email. Let's open this in our Gmail. We'll get a login link because we're logging through email. Log in, and what you'll notice once I log in is that this application renders. And look at this. We have to request access to view the user details. So this user doesn't have any access. So let's request access. And the moment of truth, oh my goodness, I am faced with the request access element.
That's the red one.
Think twice before you hit this button.
Don't test.
All right, so reason. I want to see the user details. Just something short and sweet. And here I'm going to request the access.
Think twice. The request.
I only thought once because I like living on the edge.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And click the red button. Push the button.
So I requested the access. And now what we're going to do is we're going to log in to the admin who can manage this request and actually see what happens. So let's go to Filip plus admin at permit.io. Let's continue with the email again. Open up Gmail, get the link, log in right there. And what you'll notice is that this user has elevated permission. So he can instantly view the user details, which is this little pop-up here. But also there is a Manage Users button. Now, if I click this Manage Users button, which I should also have permissions to, because this button is also specifically guarded by a permit check, it should open up the user management element, and it does. And as you can see here at the very top, Filip
Is
Smith
requesting
is requesting
access. He
access.
haven't thought twice. He just requests access.
He did it.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And here he's requesting access to essentially view the user details. But in this case, as the admin, I have the power not only to approve or deny, but also change his role. Now, for this specific case, for Filip in this case, I don't want to give him admin permission. Thank you, moderator. I want to only give him permission to view the details, the user details, but not be able to access or see the user management element. So I'm going to give him the role of a family friend. And what's this?
That is elevated.
See the user details. So he gave me a little comment. Now I have to think about it as a moderator. Do I give him access? I will, because we need to see this demo actually fully work. So there you go. I gave him access. Now I can close this, and let's log out and log back in with Filip. So the basic role.
The Filip Smith.
The Filip Smith, that's the one. Filip at permit.io. Continue with the email. We'll open up Gmail. Oh, we'll log in. There we go.
Oh,
we're building the tension. We're building the tension. And if I view the user details, well, the button has changed. I'm going to view it. Yes, I can view the details, but I can't access the specific user management element or edit the details. So as you saw here, those permissions have been elevated. They have been assigned to that user. I was able to access the user management element as an admin and make sure to approve or deny those elements. And the way that looks in Permit is just very simple. If we go to the directory, what you'll notice is that Filip Smith has just been assigned a role on top of the role that he currently has that has the more elevated permissions. And a fundamental thing within Permit, if you have a role that has higher elevated permissions, that will always take precedence. So I think that kind of wraps up the access control and user management element demo. I hope you guys liked it. We will share all the repository with you guys as well. And yeah, there is also actually, I wrote in a whole blog on this, which will be somewhere here.
Including, yeah, it's there.
It's there.
Whatever. Yeah, the previous one.
You can scan
thank you. Thank you very much. That was super cool demo. I can't believe that you implement all that with only one line of code. And I think that developers who don't go through all the steps can get from zero authorization, zero to hero in literally less than 30 minutes to get all the components in their application, which is super cool for me. But unfortunately, we do not have more time today to expand on the correctness versus verification, which I'm super sorry about it, especially for myself, because I really wanted to talk about it. But I'm reminding you that Permit is always here in the community or with the next live streams that we have. We'll do another one in October, and I promise to get you some more cool demos. So thanks for being with us. We left another 2 minutes. We really don't want to have longer. If you have any kind of questions or comments or thoughts about Permit roadmap or the way we do, we'll be very happy to hear about them. You can leave your comments in YouTube live chat, in YouTube comments, in LinkedIn comments, in Twitter comments. Our moderator who hidden behind the scenes, Shaked, is seeing them all and deliver that to us, and we'll be super happy to answer them live. So just take your time. Filip, I really want you to thank you again. As always, you are a true advocate in the way that you're actually taking people into the tutorials and explain all the bits and bytes that require to understand everything. And that really was super cool. I'm very happy that as a family friend, Filip Smith got the approval to even though he haven't thought twice, which is something that we need to fix next time.
Yes, exactly.
But anyway, thank you very much, and thank you, Shaked, for moderating us. See you next week. Next week we have a very cool live stream with Ohad Meislich from N0 and one of the founders or the co-maintainers of the Open Tofu, the open source version of Terraform, will be here to talk about everything as code, not only infrastructure as code, but also policy as code and configuration as code and application as code. No, that's all thing. But anyway, we'll be here to talk about everything as code, together also with Raz, who is the developer of the Terraform provider of Permit. See you all next week. Bye.
See you next week and see you next month for another update on Permit features. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.